What's going on, everybody? Kalipus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G about a year after my original review and going over whether or not it's still a good phone to buy at this point. Now, a couple things to keep in mind here. First of all, this phone was never officially launched in the US, so if you are in the US, just keep in mind no carrier is going to have this phone, so you're not going to find any deals like getting it for free, for example. That being said though, it is decently affordable, especially now, because it does have a successor, the Samsung Galaxy A34 5G. So yeah, if you get this phone factory unlocked on like Amazon, for example, it should be pretty affordable. Now if you do end up wanting to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But without further ado, let's get into it. So with the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, we're getting a 6.4-inch 90Hz Super AMOLED display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 411, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. So definitely a nice display here compared to something that has like a 6.6-inch display, for example. It might not be quite as large, but honestly, at 6.4 inches, I feel like this is pretty much a perfect display size if you're consuming a lot of content like watching videos, for example. In my experience, things are going to be pretty nice and comfortable, and it does have really good image quality too. With the Super AMOLED, we're getting nice bright colors, good brightness, and the viewing angles are also really good. So if you're outside in the sun, for example, things are definitely going to be real easy to see. The 1080p resolution also gives us a nice sharp image, and with a 90Hz refresh rate, the movement on the screen is going to be a bit faster and smoother, making the phone feel a bit more premium to use. And with the 20:9 aspect ratio, we're also getting a pretty tall and narrow form factor. So if you're doing something in landscape mode like watching videos or looking at photos, you're going to get a nice immersive experience, and things are going to look a bit more cinematic. So overall, I really have no complaints about the display here. Image quality is great, the size and dimensions are perfect in my opinion. Now obviously, if you're looking for a super huge display, then you might be better off getting something like a Samsung Galaxy A73 5G or a Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G or something like that. But honestly, for the average user, this display is pretty much perfect. The only thing that could be better, which unfortunately wasn't changed with the A34 5G either, is this water drop notch for the front-facing camera. Sure, on one hand, compared to some of the more obnoxious ones, it's definitely not bad. But again, if you are in landscape mode, you can kind of see it, especially more than like a hole punch. But seriously, it's not really that bad. Definitely not the end of the world. So in general, if you are looking for a more affordable 5G phone that has a really nice display, you won't go wrong with the A33 5G. Now for storage, we're getting 128GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, so definitely a great amount of storage, and I believe there's another variant out there that has 256. So if you really need more storage than this, you can probably get it. But overall, for the average user, 128GB is really going to be plenty. So if you are someone who's downloading lots of apps, games, stuff like that, or if you just have a lot of photos and videos, regardless, you will most likely get by just fine on this phone. And of course, if you have lots of photos and videos, music, stuff like that, the microSD card expansion will really help. For security features, the A33 5G does have Face Unlock and a real nice in-display fingerprint scanner. So there we go, real nice and premium. Let's give it a try. One more time. So yeah, definitely real fast and responsive. No issues at all. And again, we do have Face Unlock too, so always nice to get multiple options to unlock it. Now taking a look at the camera setup here, with the A33 5G up front, again we have this water drop notch for the selfie camera. Not the best design, but definitely not the worst. I've seen quite a bit worse. Like even with my iPhone 13. iPhones, as you guys probably know, have really obnoxious notches unless you get the 14 Pro or Pro Max, in which case they have that dynamic island thing, but in general this is definitely not intrusive or anything like that, so I don't really have that much of a problem with it. And I almost forgot to mention this camera is 13 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a full quad camera setup with a 48 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera, and a 5 megapixel macro camera. Then for video, the A33 5G has a max recording quality of 4K in both the rear and front cameras, so definitely great to see there. Overall, the camera setup here is another thing I really have just no complaints at all about. The phone takes great photos, and it has a bunch of features including an ultra wide camera and a macro camera. Sure, it doesn't have like a telephoto lens, but I feel like a lot of people don't even know what that is, let alone actually really want one. So for the average user, if you are looking for an affordable 5G phone that has a bunch of camera features and takes really nice photos, you're not going to go wrong with the A33 5G. To give you an idea of what it can do, here's some pictures taken with the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G. And again, great photo quality here. For the average user, if you're posting pictures on like Instagram, for example, it'll be just fine. And then of course, for stuff like Snapchat, where the photo quality isn't really that important, it will get the job done. And even if you're like a content creator and you're making maybe YouTube videos or something like that, while the video quality isn't like top-notch flagship level, I still do think for the most part it will be okay. So, although obviously you can always spend more money and get a better camera, with the A33 5G, the camera we're getting here here will at least get the job done for most things. Now when it comes to RAM and processor, with the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, there are several variants, but with this one in my hand, we are getting 6GB of RAM with the Samsung Exynos 1280 processor. Now I believe there's another version that has 4. I haven't actually seen it, but I've heard it's out there somewhere. And there is another one that has 8, but again, this phone in my hand does have 6GB of RAM, so definitely keep that in mind. And again, we are getting the Samsung Exynos 1280, so a pretty good processor here. Now the performance with this phone compared to a much higher end device is not really that crazy fast. If you're like playing Call of Duty all day on high graphics mode or something like that, it will struggle a bit. It's definitely not made for that sort of activity, but for things most people are typically using their smartphones for, it will get the job done. For stuff like web browsing, social media, watching videos, and some light mobile gaming, it will definitely get the job done. But just keep in mind, if you're really going to be on your phone a lot and you're more of a power user, especially doing more demanding activities, you will probably want something a bit faster. But again, for the average user, the performance we're getting here is pretty much all you're going to need. Now I did run a benchmark test on this phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. Now without anything to compare it to, this is probably not going to mean a whole lot, so I do recommend running this test on your current phone and then comparing your results to these. But overall, compared to the average mid-range phone, I would say this phone is a little above average when it comes to performance. It's not like this phone is going to be 10 times faster than a Motorola Moto G Stylus 5G, for example, but it is a little bit faster than the average phone you're going to find for around $300-ish or less. So again, if you are looking for a more affordable 5G phone and you want good, solid performance, then I do think you will be happy with this. Now for the battery, with the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, this phone does have a 5000 mAh battery, and it also supports 25-watt fast charging. And in case you're wondering, no, this phone does not have wireless charging, nor does any Samsung Galaxy A series phone. But aside from not having wireless charging, for a mid-range phone, everything else about the battery here is pretty much perfect. And in fact, compared to most higher-end devices, the battery life on this phone is going to be a bit better. So if you are looking for a phone that has a battery that's really going to last all day, you're definitely not going to go wrong here. A 5000 mAh battery is one of the biggest batteries you can get. In fact, for a while, I thought in the US that was the biggest battery you could get, but then I saw some Boost mobile phone that has a 6000 mAh battery. But regardless, for the average user, a 5000 mAh battery is going to be plenty. And with 25-watt fast charging, it's also going to charge decently fast too. So if the battery is important to you, you really won't go wrong here. But keep in mind, to utilize the fast charging, you will actually need a 25-watt fast charger, and this phone doesn't even come with a wall adapter, so definitely keep that in mind if the charging speed is more important to you. But in general, the battery specs on this phone are really good. Now for the software, the A33 5G does have Android 13, which is great, and with Samsung software support, you can also expect to get Android 14, 15, and 16. Now considering this phone is a year old at this point and did come with Android 12, technically if you get an A34 5G for example, you could get one more update, but I mean, that could go for anything at this point. So in general, if you're going to be keeping your phone for around 3 years or less, the software support here is going to be perfectly fine. And I want to say compared to the average mid-range phone, Samsung is definitely one of the better ones in general. I feel like aside from maybe Motorola, and then obviously Google and Apple, which I'm not really counting here, but with manufacturers like OnePlus and carrier brands and stuff like that, some phones don't even get major updates. Some of them only get 1 or 2, but with Samsung, with a brand new phone that was recently released, you will get 4 major updates, whereas with this phone, since it already got 1, it will be getting 3 more. So in general, I would say for what it is, definitely pretty good. As far as other features go, with the A33 5G, keep in mind this phone does have NFC, so you can use tap and pay just fine. But unfortunately, this phone does not have a headphone jack, which I still feel like it's pretty disappointing. I mean, this is a relatively new thing, taking away headphone jacks in mid-range phones. It's been going on for quite a while with flagship phones, but I feel like when it comes to a budget device, so many people use normal wired headphones that I feel like having a headphone jack is definitely a nice thing. But again, unfortunately, this phone doesn't have one, so if you do want to use wired headphones, you will need an adapter. Now, taking a look at the overall design here, we kind of talked about the water drop notch camera. A little too bad, but it could definitely be worse, and the top bezel is surprisingly thin, so I am glad about that. The bottom bezel is a little bit thicker, and when you're in landscape mode doing stuff like watching videos and all that, it makes things a tiny bit less immersive, but it's not really that big a deal. For the rest of the phone, it does have a decently slim design. The side materials are pretty nice, and so is the back. The back has more of a matte finish that you can't even see any fingerprints on here. And I do personally like the camera module too. So overall, definitely a real nice phone. The build quality also feels good, and it does have a surprisingly good amount of weight to it, so definitely a nice handset here. But in conclusion, my overall thoughts about the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G about a year after my original review. Overall, I still do think this is a great device, and especially considering even for an unlocked phone that wasn't officially launched in the US, it was pretty affordable to begin with. But again, now that the A34 5G is out, I imagine you can find some pretty good deals for this phone. And if you're looking for an affordable 5G phone for more basic activities, this still has good performance, a really nice display, a great camera setup, a really large battery, and an all-around nice design. You're definitely not going to go wrong with this phone. Now once again, if you do want to learn more about the Samsung Galaxy A33 5G, definitely check out the description where I am linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But keep in mind, when it comes to pricing, my link in the description is a pretty generic Amazon link, and with a phone like this, especially depending on the country you're in, you might be able to find some much better deals somewhere else. So before buying this phone from Amazon, definitely check your other options too. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalibus Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.